us to for the election of chair and vice chair.
Hello everybody, welcome to Health and Hackney, first meeting of the new year. We need to elect a chair. Can I have a nomination for chair? A seconder? Thank you, Cllr Adebayo. Can we vote on, is there any other nominations? No. Can we vote on Councillor Hurst as chair? Agreed.
Agreed.
Councillor Hurst as chair.
Thank you. Can I have nominations, please, for vice chair? I nominate Councillor Patrick. Thank you. Any other nominations? Thank you. Councillor Patrick is vice chair. Everyone, can I, now we've got through the procedural matters, can I welcome everybody to the June meeting of Health in Hackney, and welcome to all our new members that are joining us as newly elected councillors, and also that are here returning to the Commission. Councillor Patrick has been on it previously, so welcome. I've had apologies for absence from Helen Woodland, who's our Director of Adult Social Care, and also from Dr. Mark Ricketts, who is the former chair of what was the CCG. Welcome also to Cllr Turbet Deloff, who's our mental health champion. And I would like to say, I'm not sure if Nina is with us but congratulations on her appointment as a Director of Delivery in Hackney. I'm just going to, for new members, I'm just going to go through what is the staple matters of housekeeping, and then we can move swiftly on to the first item on the agenda. So this is a hybrid meeting. We've got some people and members online, some people in the room. If it's being live streamed and being recorded, members of the press often are watching. Please, if you're online, keep your microphones to mute unless when you are speaking. Please raise your hands if you want to get my attention online. Please do not use the chat because I won't be checking that throughout the meeting. Please do not start conversations with other people in the chat. Declarations of interest. So this is item number 4. This is a staple item. So just to assist you members, if anybody works in the NHS in any capacity, they may wish to declare for example, a declaration of interest. And it may well be that we either do it at the start of every meeting, or we can just have it as it's been said once and we needn't say it again. So are there any declarations of interest, members? Cllr Samatar? Councillor Samatar, you're still on mute, I think. Do you just want to...
Good evening, Chair. Just wanted to confirm that I work for Mind, the mental health charity.
Thank you very much. Thank you. And we'll note that. And it may be, Councillor Samatar, we can just keep that noted so you don't have to say it every meeting. With that then, let's... Yep, Councillor Goldberg.
Yeah, I'm currently doing some placements in NHS.
Placements? Placements. Thank you very much. We'll have that noted as well.
I'm a board director in the mental health community interest company in Hackney.
Thank you very much. I know, but I'm not going to stand on ceremony. And Councillor Adebayo? And can we just keep the microphones on? That's it.
Okay, I'm also a mental health worker.
But for many of those, I hope we can probably just have them noted once and we needn't do them every meeting. The next item I need to do is item number 5, which is to appoint representatives to the Inner North East London Scrutiny Commission. So for new members, just to explain what that is, this commission provides a governance service to the health leaders and the health outcomes in Hackney, and we scrutinise our health leaders in that function. Some decisions that affect Hackney residents are made on a basis of a 7-borough basis across North East London. And so when those decisions are made, instead of the directors of the hospitals, for example, coming to each single 7-borough and repeating it, that would obviously take up a lot of NHS time and resource. So what they do is they ask a few councillors from each borough to sit on what's called the North East London Scrutiny Commission, and then they go there and then they present, for example, what's to change or what the update is, and then they bring that governance item, whatever it is, to that commission. And so what we do is we have to send 3 members to that commission for that function. And that commission meets 4 times a year, and I currently chair that commission for North East London. And just to help you understand, there are actually essentially 5 of those commissions in London. So essentially, the London health map is divided into 5 areas, of which North East London is one, and then there are 4 others. So it's convention that me as chair and all the chairs of the local commissions are on that. It's also convention that the vice chair also goes forward for the inner North East London Scrutiny Commission. So those 2, there's also a 3rd place for that, and Cllr Adams has been historically on it. Would you, arm twist, be prepared to do it for 1 more year? Thank you, thank you very much. And then, maybe I think if other members hopefully become more familiar with how things work, and it may well be next year we can maybe shift that around. If Cllr Adams, I think, is heavily engaged at the moment with numerous responsibilities, it may be we can then get other people sort of involved in that if everyone's happy with that. So unless anyone objects, can I have the appointments for the 3 members to inner North East London to be myself, Cllr Patrick and Cllr Adams? Can we agree on that, please?
Agreed.
Thank you very much. With those matters of formality out of the way, can I then turn to our first substantive item, which is the science on the health impacts of air quality? And we're very fortunate today to welcome Dr. Ian Mudway from Imperial College, the Faculty of Medicine, who's one of the experts in the field in the UK on this area. And he's very helpfully he's here in person with us, and he's very helpfully provided a slide deck starting at page 15 on the bundle, and he is going to talk us through that on some of the science and academic understanding of how air quality impacts upon us. I mean, speaking for myself, we as local representatives are often told so many hundreds or thousands of people fall ill or die from air quality each year, and it's difficult sometimes to translate that into what that means when you hear about cancer or dementia and how that science base is proved. So it would be interesting to hear. So Dr. Mudway, we've sort of allowed up to 20 minutes for your presentation, or 25, and then we're also then hear from officers from the council, and then we'll throw it open to questions. So Dr. Mudway, over to you.
Well, that was a spectacular start. I couldn't find the correct button. Thank you very much. So I've been asked just to give a kind of an update, and a sort of an update which really touches on London and London now. But what I wanted to do to begin with is just, again, I'm going to put up an infographic. Hopefully that will appear on your screen in a second. And this infographic is a World Health Organization infographic, and it just gives you a global perspective of the significance of air pollution on global health. It is the #1 environmental cause of premature death and morbidity globally. And if we just consider the figures from 2060, what you're really talking about is air pollution contributing to the early deaths of 4.2 million individuals globally annually. And I also wanted to highlight in this figure, there's this one, and I'll come back to this number later on. This was published in around 2017-18. But at this time, the big sort of statement was that 90% of the global population lived in areas where the concentration of pollution, and specifically fine particulate matter, or PM2.5, was above the level which was regarded as safe or safe for health by the World Health Organization. Now, there are lots of things we know. Yeah, we know that the major causes of death are respiratory, cardiovascular. We have stroke here, and in this slide, I've indicated the global burden of deaths associated with PM 2.5 predominantly, and clearly most of these burdens fall disproportionately on developing economies, particularly within Central and Southeast Asia. But there still is a considerable burden within Europe and the OECD European area of around 250,000 excess deaths per year. And often that figure is expressed within the United Kingdom as being an excess death on average of 40,000 deaths within the United Kingdom. But I don't want to focus on the things we know. I want to focus on the new information, which tells you that all of these numbers are probably a significant underestimate of the true burden of air pollution. And some of the data which illustrates that air pollution is something which is worth tackling in the short term in order to have maximum health effects. So let's think about emerging risks. Here we have two human brains, healthy brain, a brain from an individual who had Alzheimer's disease. And the reason I've illustrated this is since probably over the last 6 years, the evidence linking air pollution to an increased incidence of Alzheimer's disease has increased considerably. Now, when it came out, everybody was a little bit shocked in the field, but actually perhaps it isn't really a tremendous surprise because there are already pre-existing associations between heart disease and stroke with Alzheimer's risk. But the strength of this data is considerable. And over the last 5 years, I think if you were to simplify the message, what we've discovered is that air pollution is quite bad for the human brain, not just at the end of life, but in terms of early brain development in children, and also in terms of mental health, particularly as young adults transition through adolescence into early middle life. And that's massive, because this is not quantified in the economic costings of air pollution to the exchequer. Now, the Treasury's own figures around 13 billion, a more sort of like comprehensive evaluation from the Department of Health is around 20 billion pounds per year. If you add in dementia and the costs of mental health across both the central health system and community care, then these numbers are really quite alarming. It's been covered considerably in the press, sometimes well, sometimes not so well, and I think that contributes to some public misunderstanding, particularly about how you communicate environmental risks to the public. But let's put this into context. This data does not necessarily just come from China or Beijing or Thailand, places where it's high. And I'm going to focus on studies which have come out of work conducted within our group in collaboration with a number of other centres in the United Kingdom, this with St George's in South London. And this looked at incident dementia within London between 2005 and 2013. And I'm going to show some graphs because I think graphs are really important. I don't know how well this is going to show up, so I'll try to take you through it. I've got a kind of bouncing laser pointer here. And what we've got here are your increased risk of dementia. And along the axis down here, we have sort of different types of pollutant, nitrogen dioxide, PM 2.5. And then the PM 2.5 is being cut up to allow us to attribute the PM 2.5 attributable to traffic. And what you can see is if we've broken these down to quintiles, as the concentration of the pollutants increase, we see increased risks of incident dementia in the population. We have information here on noise, because noise was included in the model. That didn't seem to contribute. And if you're wondering why, if you read this graph, it looks as though NO2 and PM 2.5 are bad, but ozone seems as though it's doing quite a good job of reducing dementia incidence. That's to do with the behavior of NO2 and ozone in the atmosphere. When NO2 goes up, ozone goes down. So it's sort of an artifact of the measurements and the exposure modeling. But this is London. This is increased incident dementia linked to air pollution in London, adjusted for all of the other factors that we know are known factors driving dementia risk within the population.
And Dr. Mudway, is that just on that last graph? Is that sort of over a number of years study?
That's 2000. I think if you go back, it's 2005 through to 2013.
Right.
There's a kind of a lag in all of these studies, which is really frustrating because you want to say, but air pollution has changed. How does that affect figures? But those studies are in train, but they haven't yet reached that sort of level of maturity where you can comment on them. The danger is you just take the associations you see and you work back to work that out.
If you can.
We know that's the data, but do we know the pathology behind it? I mean, why?
It's really,
what happens?
It's really interesting. The Committee of the Medical Aspects of Air Pollution, which is a Department of Health committee, is about to release a report. It's taken a very long time to come out. And the benefit of that is that they brought on neurologists and specialities in dementia. Dementia is quite complicated. I guess that most people know that. You've got different subtypes, and sometimes those subtypes can only be classified by autopsy, yes? So the link, you might think, would be with vascular dementia, because we have that vascular link from stroke and cardiovascular disease, and that would read across. But interestingly, in this study, when they compared these risks with comorbidities for cardiovascular disease, these associations remained, yeah? Now, the mechanisms, that needs to be worked out. There's lots of conjecture about whether it's particles getting to the brain, or whether it's simply the long-term sustained increase in inflammation in the body over 20, 30 years, which drives forward sort of accelerated aging, yeah, effects. But that's not completely nailed down. If that's end of life, and really what you're looking at, incident dementia is just the point at which you reach a certain level of mild cognitive impairment, which affects daily life. This is the other end of it. And I think this is when it gets really important about now. So this is a study from Barcelona, and Barcelona done lots of studies looking at early life cognitive development in children in schools near or distant from busy roads, and particularly roads carrying diesel traffic. And in that respect, they're quite similar to us in London. And what you have here, I mean, the graph, this is the model graph, but this graph is quite informative. So they looked at these children, did cognitive tests over a relatively short period, only about a year, and they tracked their cognitive performance to derive a measurement of their working memory. And it's quite marked that even over 1 year, you can see a sort of divergence of that cognitive domain in those children, with the children in high pollution schools performing less well than the children in the low pollution schools. Then there are links to mental health. Now, mental health is challenging for air pollution, because it's well known that city dwelling is quite bad for mental health generally. And you've got a lot of things you have to try to deconvolute before you can attribute air pollution as being a contributing factor. But this is a study I was involved in, and it's a study which actually, I must admit, surprised me massively. Now, it was built on a cohort in Southeast London, known as the Salco cohort, which is a random household survey, where you've got individual information on confounding. By confounding, I mean smoking status, all of the individual facts you don't normally get in these types of analysis. And there are kind of 3 bars here. You've got a bar here, here, and these are basically the results of different questionnaires. CIS is the clinical survey. It's a reduced version, and it looks at common mental disorders, subclinical scores telling us something about depression and anxiety. We have the PHQ, tells us about physical health, and SF12, which is much more about well-being. Now, the graphs are complicated, but the important thing here is if you look, just look at the CIS scores, common mental disorders, we can see that there are significant associations between poor scores on those clinical scales with exposures, annual exposures to NO2, NOx, and particularly to PM2.5. Put those together, that's probably telling you something about traffic. And because we were so concerned about this data set, we tried to make this effect disappear by putting as many measurements of urban deprivation in there as we possibly could, including local scale, very local scale household perceptions of the quality of the neighborhood. And in fact, if you then looked at this study, which is longitudinal and across time, and focused on the individuals who didn't move, the associations were actually stronger. Now that's looking more at a kind of depressive anxiety type scale. The thing which really surprised us is we had another questionnaire which looked at preclinical psychotic traits, invasive thoughts, and here again we saw significant associations between psychosis risk with air pollution exposures. And we've got 4 dots here, and what I'm trying to say here is that we've got these models, and we're linking these scores to the air pollution modeled at the household, and then we're trying to make that effect disappear. Each of these models is adding in something which could also explain that variable. And you can see that they don't change. These 4 dots seem to be quite constant across the ranges, and that's telling us this is a robust association. So the mind matters, and we have to focus about it. All of that sounds very negative, but as a positive factor, it tells us if you can reduce air pollution, you have a modifiable factor that will have an immediate benefit on very, very costly health impacts on your local residential populations.
Just that can you just go back to the last slide there? So on that one, so when you say you're modelling it to sort of take away, so in other words, for example, what we might be doing there in either models, well, in a lot of those models, is you're taking out the fact that someone could have a high level of deprivation, someone could be maybe incredibly well off, but because they're living close, say, I'm being very simplistic here, but to a main road or in a high area, you're still seeing an increase in mental disorders.
It's not simplistic. That's exactly what it is. It's attempting to remove the things which could explain the effect that you're observing, which isn't actually associated with the thing you're attributing it to. I mean, these types of studies are statistical, so they look at associations, yes? They don't demonstrate causation, which I think was your point, but you do have to do a really good job of removing those other factors. Now, the other thing which has gone, I focused, across the life course, and the life course has become the big discussion in air pollution, is early life effects, yes? Now, I'm not going to dwell on sort of like birth weights, head circumference, because there's already evidence of associations with that in the UK population. But I'm going to look at some other developmental trajectories. Whereas cognition was looking at brain development, the area which I've always been particularly interested in is in respiratory development and in children. And I just wanted, again, to just throw up some studies, and these are relatively old. I was involved with a study with Queen Mary's University with Chris Griffiths, the Exhale study, which followed lung growth in children, and I can tell you the study domain, from 2008 all the way through to 2014. So it was put in place so that we'd be looking at lung development, measuring lung volumes, looking at respiratory symptoms in these children over a considerable period of time. Now, for reference, and things thankfully were a lot better in 2022 than they were in the first 2 years of this study. But when we started this study, this is a map of Tower Hamlets and Hackney, and the dots represent the locations of where the children lived. The colour scale here represents annual NO2 concentrations. And anything in this graph, which is, well, let's put a little arrow there, greater than yellow, at the time was exceeding the EU limit value of 40 micrograms per meter cubed. And so I always used to think at the time we were doing these studies, people would be very obsessed about hotspots. And I wanted to say, the hotspot's your entire borough. It's everybody who lives there, every man, woman, and child. Now, this has clearly gone down, but that was the framework. That was our diesel-generated NO2 pollution signal within London at the time we started this study. Now, we followed the lung function for many years, and towards right at the end of the study, towards the final phases of the LEZ, we began to see the first real evidence that NO2 was going down, at least within the city, not by much. But it's the health impact we saw in the children, which I think is really critical. I'll skip this. This just says that London was really bad compared to everybody else, and everybody gets upset if you compare your city to somewhere else. I won't do that. These graphs look immensely complicated, and they kind of are, but they're also quite simple. So let me explain. This FVC is forced vital capacity. It's a measurement of lung volume. Yeah? And what we're looking at here is the change in lung volume per modeled exposure per unit to NO2. Yeah? So this is a change in volume per microgram per meter cubed. Yes? And what we've done in this study is we've worked out the exposures based on where they live and based on the time they spend at school and the time they spend at home. Actually, it made no difference because you could literally throw a handkerchief over where these children lived and where they attended schools. And then we've kind of worked out the exposures on the morning before we went to the schools to do the assessments, 24-hour previous exposure, exposure for the previous week, and an annual exposure. And the reason we did that is that lung function responds acutely to air pollution. So if you want to isolate a long-term effect, you have to isolate the fact that the short-term exposures aren't having an effect. What we can see along this line is all the short-term exposures were doing not very much.
So they calculated the tidal volume based on kids. It's really hard to know on a child the tidal volume.
Yeah, so these children are 8 to 9, and this is pre and post bronchodilator. We went into the schools, we were in the schools for about 4 or 5 hours each day. This was really intensive gold standard spirometry. It is often a weakness. People turn up, do a quick spirometry test. This isn't that. This was done with proper respiratory professionals. And we did pre and post bronchodilator because at the time we did the study, there was a high rate of underdiagnosed asthma. in the community, and actually we found much more reversibility in these children than you would have imagined. Even those with asthma were relatively poorly controlled at the time. The big data's here. So let me just put a line here, highlight that. This is the amount of lung function, and it's a significant loss of lung function, which has been lost by those children because, and it's been linked to the NO2. Now, it's not very much, is it? That's 2.3 mils per microgram. But if you just take on board that everybody lives somewhere which is greater than 40 micrograms per meter cubed, you can multiply that up. The children by the age of 9, 10, had lost around 100 to 120 mils of lung volume. Now that sounds very abstract, and so the best way I can express that is they'd lost the equivalent of 2 large eggs of lung volume because of the air they had breathed growing up in those 2 boroughs at that time. Now this matters. Now that won't cause respiratory symptoms unless somebody's really vulnerable, yes? Why this is important is because it tells you that your organs are not growing optimally. And if your lung doesn't reach its peak volume in adulthood, it's a really good predictor of your life expectancy and your susceptibility for chronic diseases in later life, which means the exposures in childhood now will have their effects on this population when they're 50, 60, and 70. So the air pollution you breathe today stores up health inequalities and health problems stretching quite a long time into the future. So this is all very negative. I often tell people it's quite negative. I want to give you some positive news because there are places where they've put in place regulations and reduced air pollution. And one of the places they've done that is in Southern California, where they've been quite bold in terms of their policies. Now, again, this is looking at the percentage of children with small lungs. Let's just look over here at this bit. I know this jumps around. The final 3 graphs here. And these are the percentage of children within 3 separate cohorts in Southern California. And they analyzed them between, in orange, 1994 to 98, in purple, between 1997 to 2001, and in green, 2007 to 2011. They're not the same groups, they're different groups of children. And over this period of time, air pollution fell in Southern California. And as it did, the proportion of children with forced vital capacity less than 80%, and that is clinically significant, fell from around 7.5% to about 3%. And this is something you see in air pollution studies globally, where people have shown an adverse effect in air pollution, and then the air pollution has gone down. It is possible to see the health dividend that is delivered. The improvement here in lung volume, actually in the States, the improvement in life expectancy that you see in populations. So you don't just see the adverse, you can see the benefit of reducing air pollution.
Okay, just wondering if you because from the table, you said the pollution has went down a bit in 2022. So just wondering if you have went back to carry out the survey again.
I'm going to get on to that. It's not quite so simple as having the opportunity to just go back. You have to get somebody to fund you to go back. But we are doing a follow-up study, which covers more recent time, and I'll tell you about that in a second. In fact, I'll tell you about it now. Actually, that's the next slide, which is perfect. So clearly, now we have the ULEZ. And because we had the data from the previous study, we use that as a mechanism to get funding from the NIHR, National Institutes of Health Research. And this study is, I'm going to jump that because I'm sure somebody will tell you that NO2 is going down. We are doing a repeat study, yes? If anything, this is a much better study than the study we did before. So in London, each of those stars are either within the original area of the ULEZ, the congestion charging zone, or if they're outside that zone, it's because they have school catchment areas within the zone. And we've been looking at these schools since 2018, yes? Each year going back and doing longitudinal lung function measurements in these children with a little bit of awkwardness and interruption because of COVID and access of getting into schools. So we're just about to finish a year now in July, and we have 1 more year left of this study. So it will take us up to the current time. Now, this study was designed to demonstrate whether the ULEZ works, which meant that we had to have a control population. And finding a control population for an inner London population is not straightforward. The population we have used is Luton, yes, because they have similar proportion of South Asian individuals. It's not perfect, yes, but it's as good as we could do, yes. And we were also picking an area where people didn't think there would be changes in their air pollution, which was secondary to improvements in air pollution in London. Now, that study's ongoing. We're probably about 18 months away from telling you an answer to it, because we're running it like a drug trial. Yeah, all the data will not be analyzed until the final piece of work is being done, because one of the dangers I find with air pollution is you have these small studies and people analyze them as they go along. Here we're trying to be absolutely robust, or literally following standard clinical trial protocols. Yeah, and I think that's going to be a fundamental strength of this study. Now, I wanted to say a few things in wrapping up. Okay, the first thing I wanted to say is that you respond to the data you have. And unfortunately, science progresses much faster than policy can respond. And so I'm going to tell you the goalposts have moved. And as they've moved, the messaging around air pollution to your communities is going to have to change dramatically. The first thing which has happened is in September of last year, the World Health Organization updated their guideline values for air pollution for the first time since 2005. Now, these were already at odds with the European Union limit values, yes? And the values which have now transmuted into UK law. Because these values are set based on health, whereas the European Union and national government standards are based on health titrated versus feasibility and practicality. But it has changed. So the WHO's PM 2.5 standard used to be 10 micrograms per meter cubed. Now, this guideline value, London was already over, yes. We didn't talk about it because the EU limit value was 25, and that 2.5 increment was quite a fiery topic amongst individuals. But if it was a fiery topic then, it's a more fiery topic now because they've halved it to 5, yes. So bear in mind that that standard has been reduced, and within, and this is important, within their guidelines, they have said that that applies to indoor and outdoor air. First time that's actually been placed on the record. The other one is NO2. Now, NO2, we had a problem with. It has been going down within the ULEZ zone because of the policy, yes, particularly at roadsides. And so we might have been happy with that. And nobody talks about this revision because it's gone to 10. It's been quartered, yes? Now that changes everything, because I think there have been policies where people have said, now we're less than 40, we can do X, Y, and Z, infrastructure building, yes? People will be coming back and saying, it's now 10, yeah? And people will have to have a response for that. And these numbers haven't been picked out of air. You can read these reports yourself. The WHO have all the evidence online. The reason these standards have been reduced is because the evidence now exists that there are significant health effects below their former guideline values. Now, clearly, practicality and feasibility still has to be involved, but it can't be at the same level. You know, if one's halved, you have to think about how these play out. I'm going to skip this because this is just talking about the fact there are short-term standards and they're quite challenging as well. But this is something I'm really passionate about that we don't lose sight of in the debate about air pollution and health. This is the sectors with the greatest proportion of CO2 emissions to our budget within the United Kingdom. And I just wanted to make the point that if you look at this line at the top, this is the CO2 emissions attributed to energy, and it has fallen. It has fallen in such a way that now the largest single contributor to CO2 is road transport, with the greatest proportion of that being cars and taxis. I always think I have to mention this when anybody complains about the ultra-low emission zone, because quite frankly, I can't see how we can meet our net zero targets at the timeline that has been set without almost the entirety of the United Kingdom becoming an ultra-low emission zone. Somehow I think there have been some policy disconnects here. We have to deal with combustion emissions from transport, and we've got to do it very, very quickly Otherwise, not only will we not be protecting health, but we won't be meeting our net zero targets. And I think that has to be held up in any discussion about health now, because in fact, these health effects associated with the warming climate are significant and will begin to play into these considerations. And then finally, this is just something I always think is really important. I mean, I obviously work in health, and so consequently, I think health is the most important thing. I live in Lewisham. This is on our coat of arms. The health of the people is the highest law, i.e. it should trump all other decisions. That's my position, my viewpoint. I know it's more complicated for people working at the coalface of local government. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed. What I want to do, I mean, because I think we've got presentations from the officers, but can I just take a few, if there are any sort of immediate questions coming in now for Dr. Mudway, and then I'll sort of bring in the officers. Claudia?
Hello, hi. Fascinating report. There are a couple of things that I wanted to kind of check in terms of the study that is taking place. I didn't know, it's the first time I read about, or when I read a report about the Chile study, which, if I understand correctly, tries to find out whether reducing air pollution from traffic is good for children's health, right? So the stars on the report show the schools that are being studied.
Mm-hmm.
And that, if I understood correctly, we're 18 months away from kind of knowing the end result of the studies, right?
No, we're 18 months away from having the data to
from
analyze, but I was just trying to give you that kind of horizon.
the heads up.
Yeah.
Great. My question and my immediate concern in terms of mental health, hearing or how it impacts mental health, especially in young people, is what is happening with other schools that are not being studied, or other schools in roads where, for example, LTNs, although is reducing air pollution greatly in many areas. I'm concerned about the main roads and the schools near those main roads. I would like to hear your thoughts on that, and if there is any study on that as well. Thank you.
So the studies on road proximity and impacts on certainly early children's mental health and cognition, mostly the ones which are published, the ones which are the best, are from Barcelona, yes? And Barcelona does have quite a lot of similarities to London in terms of its traffic constitution. The Cllr study has plenty of schools near roads. We will be able to extract that. And the other thing I would say is that 2 years into the study, the evidence about mental health and cognition began to come out. And so we actually went to the Barts charity and asked them if they would fund an addition of cognitive function and mental health assessments on the children taking part in the study. So that has now been added because we felt that it was an opportunity, and we would be missing a significant opportunity to look at that, because not only do we have really good modelled exposures, not only do we have schools in really quite close proximity to traffic and some further away from traffic within those zones, but we have changes and different policies enacting. One of the challenges I have in Cllr is that it's meant to be evaluating the ultra low emission zone, but you can't stop schools from taking their own mitigation actions. You can't stop councils from doing their own actions. So very often we have to now keep a log of safe school streets and whether the schools have had sort of like filtration systems put into them, whether they've had green wards, just so that we can use those ultimately almost as confounders in our study of the ULEZ. And that's a factor of the fact that for us, we regard the ULEZ as a drug. It's the drug of choice to deal with the damage that air pollution is doing to children growing up in our city.
Cllr Samatar?
Thank you, Chair. Good evening, Ian. Thank you for that really powerful presentation. I was writing down a lot back here, but also we have the presentation as well. Thank you so much. I wanted to ask, and this is one of the key areas that's important to for all of us, as you said, in order for us to get to that end goal of making sure we reach net zero and making sure the information gets out to as many of communities as possible, how are we doing that in terms of taking inclusivity of language and culture and like different people in different communities into perspective, to making sure that the research is inclusive of the people that make up, for example, Hackney, we've got 80+ languages. I'm not sure about elsewhere, so how are we doing that to make the research as inclusive as possible?
So if I take Cllr as an example, Cllr by definition is about as inclusive as you can get. Yes, so everything has to be done in multiple languages, and the only reason it's been possible is that the team of researchers on the ground have been able to form over 5 to 6 years really good working relationships with the community. So they have trusted status within those communities, because doing a research study like this is making an ask on people who already have very little bandwidth left when you consider the other aspects and challenges of their life. And so it was very big. It was a big component of our work that we had to become parts of those communities in order to actually gain their trust. Yes. The second question is how you communicate that information back. And I guess there's been a realization historically that the scientific community has been very good at going in, doing science, and then leaving everybody behind, and just publishing their science and move on. I think things are changing. They're changing because the research councils themselves, the people who fund the research, are now very, very committed to ensuring that the research actually does reach the communities who it affects. And ultimately, of course, that means finding mechanisms and people within those communities to almost act as ambassadors to convey those messages. And it's something we've realized considerably. And certainly within our centre, we do a huge amount of outreach activity. And there's a massive amount of activity going on across all of the boroughs in London. Sometimes I think one of the great shames is there's a better mechanism of sharing the best practice, which is occurring across all of the boroughs in London in this particular area. So there's a more uniform mechanism of communicating across very diverse groups.
Thank you. So Cllr Adebayo and then Cllr Adams. I'll take, and Cllr Patrick. Right, I'm going to take these three together because I do want to bring the officer's presentation in. So 3 questions together. We'll ask Dr. Mudway to answer, and then we'll go into the other presentations. So Cllr Adebayo first.
Thank you. Firstly, thank you so much for that explanation. You did talk about the impact on the young ones' mental health. I just want to know whether there is any recommendation, wants to know whether there is any improvement in the mental well-being of those young ones following the changes in the graphic in 2022, following that changes.
No, I think the question's a very good question. It's that we've shown there are adverse associations, but air pollution has gone down. Has there been improvement? Yes. Those studies simply haven't been done yet. We're doing those studies, yes. And it's one of those issues that you want the answer right away. Yes. In fact, we want the answer right away, but unfortunately science has its own pace, and it's very frustrating for the people who have to then wait for it. And we can also control that. I think it's very important that people in policy positions understand science beats to its own drum. We have peer review. We may have all the data ready. We can't speak about it really until it's been independently peer reviewed. And that can be one of the most brutal processes that you've ever seen. And it can last a very long time. And we are no longer in control of it, yes? So ultimately it means the science at the end of it comes out, it's kind of being cooked in the furnace of truth, if you can use that as a sort of metaphor. But it's always later than the people want it. And it always feels, therefore, as though we're reflecting on the past, not the future. And I can only apologize for that, but that's the limitation of the scientific method, I'm afraid.
Thank you for the presentation. I was just wondering that during your this study, did you take account of the indoor pollution that individual participants are experiencing in their homes?
So in Cllr?
Yes.
No. but it's not because we weren't concerned about it. So we do have some questionnaires, yes, which ask questions about sources of known pollutants in the home. And really, the most common ones are probably cigarette smoking and gas cooking, to be quite honest, yes. But we realized probably over the last 3 or 4 years that actually not just within our group, within research in this area overall, there's been an underappreciation and a lack of focus on indoor air pollution. And we have just been funded to do a piece of work which will be based in White City, yes? And it's being based in poor communities within White City, where we're going to go in, we'll be doing twice 100 homes, really very detailed assessments of indoor air pollution so that we can try to find a way of integrating that information into our models. But it's so complicated, yes? And then downstream, it's the question of how you regulate. I can see how you regulate outdoor air through policy. As soon as you have something to do with indoor air, then you're in people's houses giving them recommendations, and that's a much more difficult thing to do, yes? But we are doing those studies because you're right, it is important. And some of the triggers, you know, we know. I mean, if you've got somebody with asthma, you need to know what the mould situation is in the house and all of that. And I know mould is a significant issue within the housing stock we have within central London. That's something, again, we are studying in this new study.
Yeah, thank you. This has been really fascinating. I knew air pollution was bad for us, but I didn't quite realise how bad. In Hackney, we've done some work to mitigate the worst effects. We've got school streets, and we've introduced in low traffic neighbourhoods, much to the upset of some people. I wonder. I mean, I took your views on that we should be working together more, and I know London councils are. But what can be done? I suppose we need to lobby government really and the media, because this message isn't out there about the health effects of pollution. I mean, if I didn't know who somebody, not well informed, but informed to a certain level, I don't think people realise the effects on health, and especially children's development, on air pollution. And I just wonder obviously as local government associations we will lobby, what else do you think can be done, and how also as local authorities, how we can get this message across to our residents?
Well, there are two issues. The first issue is councils have to deal with their problems within their boroughs, yes? But air pollution doesn't understand borough boundaries, yes? And so many of the policies need national lead. That's absolutely the case. And so I think one of the things we should be doing is there should be certain lobbying on this. So I always think of the issues about safe school streets or low pollution neighbourhood areas. They're kind of like band-aids on a bigger problem. They're actions which we wouldn't have to take if we had proper emission controls throughout the United Kingdom. And so that should be the ask, yes? And I'd argue not only should it be the ask, we have to do it to meet our net zero commitment. So it's an interesting one. The messaging is really interesting. I know definitely at the present moment in time of thinking how to message, we do quite a lot of media work, but it has to be said, people are concerned about field. At the moment, people are quite frankly struggling to feed their children, yes? And air pollution might feel like it's a bit of a niche issue on top of all of the other issues they have to consider. If you really wanted to get it out, I've often thought there'd be two really good ways of really promoting it, yes? The one is if it was really covered in the national forecasts, yes, in a proper way, instead of, I remember when we had an air pollution episode in late March, they mentioned the pollen, but they didn't mention the air pollution on the news. I was quite horrified, yes. That would help, yes, that would help tremendously if we could do that. And the other thing which might help in schools is if schools had a requirement through Ofsted to include pollution mitigation measures in their safeguarding. At that point, that would be taken very seriously by the schools, and the schools would propagate that out to the parents, and you would be reaching a lot of the information. You'd reach everybody for the schools. Schools are a fantastic messaging thing. We've done lots of work with schools, and we've often worked on the principle that schools are great, because if you can educate the the children can nag their parents into knowledge. And so I guess that's kind of where I would go, but people are so busy.
Specific pollution mitigation through schools could look like what? What would they?
Pollution, I honestly think pollution mitigation through schools, I think schools should probably have filtration systems, really good active filtration systems in their schools. It's all got a bit blunt, it's all got a bit confused because of COVID, yes? So you have this bizarre dilemma about having to have the windows open, but worrying about the pollution coming in from the outside. So that won't last forever. And at that point, you can begin to have some sensible discussions. And there are very good technologies available. It's simply that somebody has to pay for them. And so telling a school that nobody's preventing them from having a filtration system to improve the air quality in their school doesn't work if the school doesn't have a budget to actually buy those filtration systems. So that's something worth considering. I would argue that when you close a street outside a school, it has a relatively small incremental benefit on air pollution. I think that's missing the point. I think it's a messaging point, yes, that we don't have to have cars around schools. And it makes people think about their car usage in the morning in a way which is important. And so if you ever find yourself in a debate where somebody's saying there's no real evidence, there's a significant reduction, what difference would it make? I would say this is about creating an environment to help people understand the issue. And I think that's a better way of selling it.
Thank you very much. I know there are other questions, but I need to bring in the council officers because they've got a presentation too, and then we're going to come back and then I'll wrap up with another round of questions as well. So we're joined for new members by Chris Lovitt, who's here in the chamber with us. Chris is the Deputy Director of Public Health in Hackney, and also from Dave Trew, who's joining us online, who works in environmental services in Hackney. And I understand this is a bit of a double act. So, Chris, are you kicking off? Dave first. So, Dave, over to you.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you for this opportunity to present and talk about it. And I think thank you to Dr. Mudway. That was a really fascinating presentation. You know, for me, even to learn about more of the studies that obviously working in the area, I'm kind of familiar with the health impacts, but that was really fascinating. So I appreciate that. And I will try to follow it as best I can. My name is Dave Trew, and I'm Land, Water, Air Manager in Hackney. My team covers the duties under local air quality management. And I'll sort of come to that, but it does relate to the kind of policy and legislative framework that was referred to in the previous presentation. But I just wanted to say that the Land, Water, Air team sits within the Climate, Homes and Economy Directorate. So just to say how it kind of, it does come under the climate, and so how the two are linked. And there is certainly a drive to integrate both climate change and the local air quality, in which I deal with. As you say, that I'm here with Chris Lovitt, who's Deputy Director for Public Health, and Public Health is across both Hackney and City of London. And we are going to do the double act, as you say. Just going to try and briefly cover some of the key points that is in the report, which is in the pack. So in the pack, there is the report. There's also a few other documents, such as the Air Quality Action Plan for Hackney. So some of the information will be there. So I will be presenting, which does mean that I'll be displaying my screen. I won't be able to see anyone, so if there is questions, then if the chair, if you could just alert me, or if you need to grab my attention because you can't hear.
We'll do questions at the end, Dave. You carry on, and we'll try not to interrupt you.
Fine. So this is the presentation, and hopefully everyone can see it. As I say, that what I will try to cover, that we've heard a lot about the health impacts and some of the studies in other parts of London, and we did, or Dr. Mudway covered some of the levels within London. So I'm going to try and put it into a perspective from a Hackney context. I won't go over too much of the health impacts because a lot of that has already been covered. But then Chris Lovitt will cover the guidance that's come from NICE and public health in terms of what can actually be done. And this relates to some of the questions that were asked. And then I will finish off talking about the Air Quality Action Plan, saying about how that guidance has translated into the actions that we're going to be taking. And one of the things is, as was pointed out, the need to work with our neighbours and to work with regional and national government. So this is a heat map that the colours are changing for a reason, which I will come to. But this is the annual mean concentration for nitrogen dioxide, which, as Dr. Mudway pointed out, the threshold that was recommended by World Health Organization, which got picked up by the EU and translated into national legislation, the threshold was 40. So there's two things which I wanted to show through this image, is that as we move from 2013 to 2019, we can see the colors change from those red, orange, yellows, the hot colors, to the more blues. So it does show that as we've gone through from 2013 to 2019, that the concentrations of nitrogen dioxide are decreasing. So we are seeing an improving picture. But what we can see is that it's clear that the road network within Hackney is there on the map, and it's still showing that there are levels in excess of that, that threshold. And the other thing which I would say is this is based on modelled data which has been done by the GLA. So this is the London Atmospheric Emissions Inventory, where they use a piece of software to calculate the emissions across the area, which is a really good way of demonstrating how the levels are across a wide geographical spread. But that model needs to be verified, so it has to be routed or checked against monitoring data. So it's only one method of assessing air quality, and that there is a monitoring network, and we operate a monitoring network within Hackney. So, as I said, I'm not going to go too much into the health impact, except it was just picking up on a couple of things, and it was referred to about the atmospheric interactions. So we talk about emissions of NOx. So essentially, without going too much into chemistry, whenever something is burnt, nitrogen and oxygen come together, and therefore we get these emissions, and we talk about that in emissions of NOx. But it's the NO2, the nitrogen dioxide, which is the pollutant. So we talk about concentrations of nitrogen dioxide, and that was shown in the map. So the reason why we talk about the emissions of NOx is because when the nitrogen and oxygen first come together, it can be in any form of combination of N and O. But the sources are combustion. So as Dr. Mudway's presentation demonstrated, while we think about road transport and we say lorries, what we are seeing is that cars are a huge contributor to the levels that we're seeing. And it is any form of a combustion engine vehicle. Similarly, with any burning. So while we talk about energy generation, right now I'm using a computer, so I'm demanding that energy. And also after the presentation tonight, and I'll be cooking my dinner, I'll be using the gas cooker. Anything that involves burning is going to generate nitrogen dioxide concentrations. So we need to get that message across about how people can take action themselves to reduce their contributions, and also how they can reduce their exposure. And then the other thing which I wanted to mention is in terms of the objectives, we've spoken about nitrogen dioxide, and then the studies which Dr. Mudway presented was in relation to particulate matter PM2.5. So initially, when these targets were developed, the focus was on PM10. So the number after the PM is relating to the diameter of the particle. If you look at a hair, and there's a nice image which you can see online. If you take a cross section of that hair, the diameter is about 70 microns. So it just to sort of represent how small these particles are, and therefore they can get in through the airways and get deposited in the lungs. And so over time, it's realized that the smaller the particle, the more likely that they will get right into the lungs, get deposited, and have greater health impacts. So where objectives were previously set for PM10, the focus has shifted to finer particles, which includes the PM 2.5. And as Dr. Mudway also said, in terms of goalposts changing, but apart from the WHO changing the guidelines, that the UK or the UK government, but it's for England, has introduced the Environment Act, and this required the government to set a target for PM 2.5. And there has just been a consultation, which has just finished. And in terms of that lobbying of government and what we do, that we reiterated the voices of all London boroughs through London councils to say that really the target isn't ambitious enough, and we really need to be trying to get to safer levels sooner. So this graph, and I know that we say that we don't like to compare our place against another, but I think it is just important to talk about the context, because what we have is where we've got a source which is the busy congested roads, but we've also got high population density, and we've got that combination. So therefore the people being affected, and therefore the effects, is going to be a lot greater. So we can see that this graph is showing the mortality attributable to particulate pollution in Hackney compared to London and England, and Hackney is higher. And I think while we kind of expect it because of the nature of the roads and the population that is present in Hackney, so it's going to fare badly compared to some more rural areas of England, I think it's also true that the actions we take can actually have a really positive impact and can actually improve the lives of many more people. And I know that this was picked up on by Dr. Mudway in terms of trying to translate what those health effects mean in terms of monetary costs. Now, our focus is on improving the lives of people, protecting public health. But if we can improve people's quality of life, and those people are not presenting to GPs, not needing to attend hospital, then there's obviously a benefit for their quality of life, and there's going to be advantages for healthcare providers. And what this table is clearly showing that how it does underestimate those costs, given now we know the effects that air pollution can have on a variety of different health outcomes. So I'm now going to pass over to Chris Lovitt to talk about the guidance from NICE.
So thank you, colleagues, for inviting me this evening, and thank you to Ian and Dave for their presentations. I think you've clearly heard that there is a significant health impact, and the two slides that I'm just going to cover are essentially what we should be doing about them. So the National Institute for Health and Care Excellence, NICE, in 2017 produced guidance which essentially is taking the evidence base and then making recommendations about how you can address the health impacts of air pollution, and you've obviously clearly heard that they are very significant. And what NICE does is actually produce these guidance not just for public health, but actually for everybody who works in the public sector, so the NHS, all the councils, and also makes recommendations to the national government. And many of these recommendations will need the partnership between local people, businesses, and national and international government in order to address them. So we've summarized the guidance into 7 main areas. And these basically will address some of the health impacts that have been highlighted. And I think you have heard that this will need action urgently, but actually these actions often will have to take they will take some time before we will be able to see the impact. So including air pollution within local strategic plans and processes, something we've certainly done in Hackney and needs to be done very, very firmly across the national and all of the partners who work in NHS, health, social care and businesses. Ensure that we have got air quality plans within all of our new developments or regeneration programs. I think you've also heard that there has been an increased need for that because we have now got even tighter targets. So we may need to actually look at to revise some of the plans to ensure that they are meeting the new guidance which has been highlighted by Dr. Mudway. Making sure that we have got ways to reduce road traffic related air pollution. Electric vehicles are obviously part of that, but they themselves will produce carbon dioxide and pollution in their total life cycle, both in terms of the energy that's used to produce them and the energy to actually ensure that they can be used. And until we've got to the point of having zero carbon renewable energy production, they will still continue to contribute towards air pollution. Making sure that we do have local and cross-borough clean air zones. And I think we've heard about the impact of the ultra low emission zone and the need for low emission travel and to ensure that we discourage motorised vehicular travel. Ensuring that air quality is considered within decisions around public sector fleet procurement. So these are all the vehicles that we use to get to and from appointments, ambulances, and also the whole of the total life cycle around the supply of everything that we consume, both within the public sector, but also within the commercial sectors as well. And then providing information to the public and health professionals around the impacts of poor air quality. I think Ian has given us some very good examples of how just by including that in the weather, that would almost certainly make sure that it is in people's minds on a daily basis, and to ensure that we are able to give people advice about how to minimise the exposure to it. And then I think importantly is actually try to address some of the source of air pollution by actually encouraging active travel and ensuring that we have the infrastructure there to encourage cycling, walking and other forms of active travel. I'll get the next slide, please. And then this is essentially the summary of the recommendations that Public Health England, that's now been replaced by OHID and UCSA, but essentially these still stand very much, and they will be updated, but this essentially is taking the evidence that colleagues like Ian and others have been producing and saying actually what do we need to do to improve air pollution. And this is very much about the kind of the larger scale level of we need to work together as local authorities. One local authority can have an impact, but we almost certainly need to do this on a London and a England and an international scale as well, if we are to fully realise the opportunities to reduce air pollution. We need to ensure that we have a coherent approach across partners and organisations. So that's very much the issue around not one local partner such as the NHS or the council can do this on their own, and ensure that everyone has a role to play. So we do need to ask people to change their behaviours to both reduce the exposure and their contribution to air pollution themselves, and then implement targeted interventions to address specific local sources. And examples include things like anti-idling interventions and pollutions hotspots. Although I think, again, you've heard from Ian that actually with pollution hotspots, if you look at the hotspots, they join up into sort of a complete area, and very much looking at the impact on vulnerable groups. But again, the best way of doing that is to reduce air pollution completely rather than just focusing on the vulnerable groups. And then reduce air pollution at the source to mitigate the consequences. So this small diagram underneath around preventing it, which is definitely the best solution to air pollution. And then where there's still air pollution, trying to mitigate it. And then the last and least satisfactory, if we can't do either prevention or mitigation, is helping people to avoid the air pollution. I'm going to hand back over to Dave now, who's going to complete the slides.
Thank you, Chris. Sorry, I did jump through some slides there, but what I wanted to talk about was that guidance which has come through from NICE and from Public Health. It really sets out kind of some of the things which can be done. And what I wanted to talk about is that Hackney does have an air quality action plan which takes on board this advice. What I want to say is that we do have the air quality action plan because we've declared the whole borough an air quality management area. And this relates to the point that was being made about those hotspots. We're required to designate air quality management areas in those areas where there is an exceedance of the targets. But we felt that actually it's better to just say, let's designate the whole borough as an air quality management area, and let's target actions that benefit all residents right across the borough. As I say, I've skipped a slide, so apologies that it's not the right slide, but in terms of the action plan, it is there in the pack. And the on Chris's slide, it was saying about prevent, mitigate, and avoid. So the prevention is trying to ensure that pollution doesn't occur in the first place. So what can we do to stop the emissions from being generated? So by promoting active travel, if we can put in place the infrastructure and ensure that people can walk safely, then obviously there is going to be no emissions associated with that. But where transport is required, that we make sure that the vehicles that are being used are as clean as possible. So we can do that through a range of different policies, through parking policies, through our planning process, and also where we're talking about avoidance or reducing exposure, we can give information to people about how they can reduce their exposure by alerting them to days when pollution is high, and also the greening. So with the schools that was mentioned, that some of the schools will have a green barrier, a vegetative barrier. So while this doesn't reduce the actual emissions, what it is doing is effectively putting in a barrier in between the source and those people who might be exposed to the pollution. So there are a few different actions there, and our action plan contains 47 different measures that we're working on. And this slide I just wanted to pick up on this point about working with partners. Obviously, the public health is across Hackney and City of London. So last year we did a webinar to health professionals to talk about some of these health impacts that are caused through air pollution, so that health professionals are aware and they're aware of the information that's out there so that they can pass it on to patients. With the Greater London Authority, obviously they are responsible for local air quality management across London now. So in developing the action plan, that has to be approved by the GLA. And then we've got a number of initiatives. So with the canals and riverways, we're trying to reduce emissions associated with people who are moored on boats. And so with those waterways that they go through Newham, Tower Hamlets and Islington. And also in Tower Hamlets, which borders Hackney, there's an area where there's a number of construction sites. So we're trying to develop a coordinated approach so that all construction sites need to meet the same standards. So so that's sort of some of the coordinated action. In terms of next steps, it is carrying on delivering that air quality action plan, which runs till 2025. Hackney and City of London will be working on the joint strategic needs assessment. And we're going to just ensure that air quality does feature within all the sort of different areas across the council. So whether it's parking policy, planning, procurement, etc.
Thank you both. Again, both incredibly informative. There were other questions from colleagues I wanted to bring in, but we've seen sort of the heat map for the nitrogen oxide, and on a sort of very simple level, I can understand what the impact the ULEZ has had, and we can see that in the heat map. On the PM2 side, as I understand sort of some of the infographics we were just looking at, that's less to do. There's still a portion of air pollution from road transport, but that's less to do with it. What are the main causes of the PM2, and has it gone down similarly to the NO2, and if so, why, if it's not so car-based? I don't know who can. I'm looking at Ian, Dr. Mudway. Are you able to assist?
I feel I should let Dave answer first.
Yeah.
I've got news.
Go on, Dave first, and then I'll go to
I'll
Dr.
come in and exactly. Yeah. So with the PM 2.5, what I was trying to allude to in my presentation is that the focus had previously been on the larger particles, which is PM10. And therefore, I think a lot of the monitoring network and a lot of the information has been in relation to PM10. As I say, this is only the diameter. So PM 2.5 is going to be a subset of the PM10. So we've got a lot of information on PM10 concentrations. The monitoring network is now growing in relation to PM 2.5, but we don't have as much data as we do for the larger particle sizes. In terms of the sources, a lot of those sources are the same. So it does come from combustion. So we would see reductions as a result of the ULEZ and other policies which tackle emissions associated with energy, so switching to renewable energy sources, etc. But you're right in that it's not all transport related. So we do see some of the particulates coming from construction sites, from industry. But I think one of the important things, and this relates to the goalposts moving and about where the World Health Organization sets a health-based standard and then versus the policy-based standard, that there are naturally occurring particulates. So because these are really microscopic particles, they can travel long distances. So we do get it from, well outside of the borough, whereas the nitrogen dioxide tends to be very close to the source. Particulates will travel a long distance, so much so that often with pollution episodes that occur, they find that a large contribution has come as a result of Saharan dust. And you think, well, that's so far away, but that is actually how far these particles will travel. And there's obviously limitations as to what we can do to address the natural sources of particulates. So our focus is obviously on the man-made sources.
Louise, do you have anything further to?
Well, I think this is a really critical issue. And I think it's a critical issue because it's at the intersection of actually having a grown-up conversation about what councils and countries can actually do about their air pollution. So if you're near a roadside, a considerable fraction of the NO2 you breathe comes from the traffic. So if you change the traffic, it's going to have a big impact on NO2. The primary traffic emission contribution to PM 2.5, even at the roadside, is quite small. The evidence suggests that it's quite an important contribution, but actually there's a greater contribution from tyre wear, from brake wear, from what we call secondary inorganic and organic. So these are chemical entities which are transported into London. And so I would be much happier for council to say we have to do something about PM 2.5. But you know what? We can only be responsible for the fraction of PM 2.5 which is generated within our borough. We can't be responsible for the transboundary or the import of other species which come from other places, because I think otherwise you create the illusion that PM 2.5 is all traffic, and it's not, yes? And at that point you can begin to have a more sensible question. So will the ULEZ have an impact on PM 2.5? It probably will, but you know what? I think it might even be too small to quantify within the measurement variations you see day to day and across time, yeah? If we were more precise when we measured things within PM 2.5 that were better proxies for what came from the tailpipe, like elemental carbon, black carbon particles, or particles of a certain size type which come from the exhaust, then we would show changes similar to NO2. But I do think in our plans in cities, we should be saying, okay, this is the bit we can deal with. And you know what? That bit, it doesn't just it results in treaties with European partners because they need to have that regulation in place to reduce those emissions.
In a very simplistic way, NO2, broadly speaking, is something we can control far more. PM2 less so, but we still need to be obviously monitoring it and aware of it and doing what we can in those aspects. And just following on from that, in terms of the health ramifications, can you break down between what the NO2 and the PM2 is, which is having more impact on, say, dementia or lung growth or?
it's a really difficult discussion because in the analysis, very often it's difficult to pull them apart, yes? Because if the particle fraction within PM 2.5, which comes from traffic, is having an effect, it's going to vary in time and in space in the same way as NO2. So it's statistically very difficult to actually pull them apart. And scientists have arguments like you would not believe about whether you can isolate an effect of NO2. That what has happened is, I think for many years, people thought that NO2 didn't have a health effect. Yes, it was basically acting as a proxy for something else within the particle fraction, which was having an effect. And that has changed. If anything, the evidence suggests that it's robust to adjustment for PM 2.5 more than PM 2.5 is robust to it. But it varies depending on your endpoint, whether it's a short-term health effect like an asthma attack, whether it's a long-term effect. All of these things vary. So there's no really simple. You could have a bigger effect on NO2, yes? But by targeting NO2, you will have a bigger effect on the particles, even if they're a small fraction, which are related with those exhaust emissions, and that shouldn't be underestimated.
I've got questions now. I see Cllr Samatar there, but I saw Cllr Turbet Deloff first. So can I bring Cllr Turbet Deloff in first, then I'll bring Cllr Samatar in.
Yeah, thank you very much. The question I had was a little bit earlier, but actually it follows up now from what you guys have presented, and it goes with cost. But first of all, I wanted to mention perhaps it's more a recommendation related to the mould, which you mentioned a little earlier, and I think this is a White City new funding or funding for research in White City, do you say?
Study is called Wellhome.
Wellhome, sorry.
You can look it up. It has a web page. All these studies have web pages.
Oh, lovely.
And it will tell you what they're trying to do. And it's in White City because that's where we are based now. So
okay. Well, what I wanted to, because you did mention mold as an element, but it will be really fascinating to see whether there could be a real in-depth study on that, because there has been none of not just mold, but chronic mold that is not repaired, especially in council homes for residents that affect young people and children, especially around the walls and so on when they're doing homework. So there is an effect on academic attainment. But this is just for knowledge of having casework, not necessarily doing a study. So that will be fascinating to see if that could be researched. I just have a question or just a recommendation as well, or for you, Dave. Thank you so much for the presentation. I know that the council, Hackney Council, has and is very serious about reducing emissions, and there is a number of programs, and one that as a Hackney resident I do feel quite proud. My concern is people that do not have the funds or the costs. Say for example, and I did speak to this to Councillor Coben about this, and I know that he has taken the recommendation, but I do want to insist. Cycling, we know that we want to increase cycling in Hackney, but bicycles are quite pricey and expensive for young people. I know that we've said that there is a 15 or 13% increase on cycling in the borough, but it would be good to understand where is this increase coming from? What does it mean? What are the age groups? What are the groups in the community that are taking up cycling? And how accessible is accessing a bike, especially for working class communities that cannot afford to buy a bike for every child, for example? Thank you.
Thank you. Dr. Mudway, did you have anything to respond to first, or shall I go straight to?
I think you should go to the people.
Dave, I mean, I'm not sure. I mean, I don't know how much of your brief is cycling, so I'm not sure how much of that you are able to answer. But if you can do what you can, that would be wonderful.
Yeah, so in terms of my brief and what I was trying to sort of set out in terms of embedding air quality into the policies across all the sort of departments across the council. So the cycling promotion sits within street scene, so it's not really for me, but in delivering the action plan, part of my role is to meet with these different teams. So a little bit in terms of, I know that we are looking at sort of the infrastructure. So I think the important thing is that people can cycle safely. So looking at some of the cycle lanes, I know that green lanes, because we have actually just put in an air quality monitor there, that there's a sort of segregated cycle lane there. I know that within sustainability and environment, in which I work, one of our sort of main pieces of work is to try and prevent waste. And that does mean that we do these repair workshops, so people can actually bring bikes. So if they've got an old bike, which, you know, there is a fault, hopefully by bringing it and getting it repaired for free, that might address some of the issues in terms of not needing to go out and spend a lot of money on a new bike. In terms of the stats, who's taking that up? That would be for street scene, and I don't have that information, but I could take that away.
That's maybe something we can take away. And so, Cllr Samatar.
Thank you, Chair. And as somebody who's just recently decided to take up cycling, there is a support scheme that I've just had the access to, which helps with cost, which has been really interesting to know, and a lot of training and so many workshops to just get people to understand what owning a bike and looking after it and everything means that the council does that I didn't know before. So very happy to continue sharing that as time goes on and I understand further. But my question was, and when we think about air quality, we think outside, right? Because air is outside. But I wanted your thoughts on how we can increase the awareness and the education of the dangers of indoor kind of health risks as well. Because after we've just come out of all of us being locked in for so long, many people, whether it's mental health, whether it's long-term illness that's external, whatever reason, some people are still, you know, in their homes and slowly adjusting to being outside again. And in terms of the technological era that we live in right now, where more young people are spending their times indoors, how are we kind of, as a community and as health professionals and everything, trying to find that the fact that when we worry about you know, the impacts of air quality is not just the cars and everything else, but also encouraging people who are indoors to come out, because indoors also has implications for health as well. Thank you.
So Dave, do you want to start off with that, and then I can possibly bring in Dr. Mudway? And could you just dovetail in about the wood burners, because I'm still my understanding as to how much they sort of feature into this in the internal point as well.
Sure. So in terms of the indoor air quality, I think it's a really important point, because obviously people are spending the time indoors and they are going to be obviously exposed to air pollution, indoor air pollution. Our focus, which has been driven by policy, has been on the outdoor side of things, and it relates to what Dr. Mudway said before about how do you regulate what goes on in people's homes. But I think that there is an important issue there in terms of, while we maybe cannot regulate against certain aspects, and we're not going to, you know, say what a person can and can't do in their home, some things, and you mentioned that the wood burners, that there is a drive to actually ensure that the actions taken don't contribute to outdoor air pollution, but in doing so, it will actually improve indoor air quality. And we can do more about raising the awareness. So if people are aware what the contributions are, it hasn't been something that we've really focused on so far, but I think it is a good point that we need to raise awareness. In terms of the wood burners, again, it comes down to what we can actually do. So from a legal perspective, if the wood burner is compliant, then we can't take enforcement action. What we can do, and which we are going to be doing in the forthcoming winter months when it gets colder, is to make people aware about those contributions that can still occur even if they're using a wood burner, which is a DEFRA compliant wood burner. And just, you know, most homes will be using it because of its aesthetic properties rather than them needing to heat it. I think there's probably an issue in that if people are working from home with the costs of energy, people may be switching to heating a single room with a wood burner, and that is something that we're going to have to look at how much that is impacting wood burner use. But it's definitely something on our radar that we need to address.
And Dr. Mudway, just on indoor, how would you categorise? And I appreciate sort of studies are still ongoing on that, but from what you know so far, what are the main scientific contributions towards indoor poor air quality? So what would be your top 3 or 5 things? And also on the wood burners point, how much of a contribution are you to say that makes?
I'd say don't live with a smoker. Let's not forget that's the major source of indoor air pollution. If you happen to share a house with somebody who smokes or any type of material, not just tobacco, I would include e-cigarettes in that, to be quite frank. I would say damp houses. I think mold's a huge problem, yes, and it does need action because it certainly has a huge impact on asthma particularly. Then it gets really complicated because the number of sources inside a house are myriad. You have VOCs, outgassing from synthetic
VOCs,
volatile organic carbons, which outgas from sort of curtains and fabrics in your house, yeah? And actually, the reality is, if I began to put a list and just go through all the chemicals in your house, you'd be terrorized, yes? But the reality is that most of you are okay most of the time, yes? So there still is a need to work out where we are. In terms of wood burners, yes, wood burning aerosols are not good for your health, yes? Whatever people say. Even the cleanest ones, which we've done human studies on, produce symptomatic responses. And in terms of emissions of a gas, of a wood burning stove, the issue isn't what it says on the tin, it's what emissions it has in a year's time, how well it's maintained, yeah? Who's evaluating all of those steps? Who's going in and making sure that the wood burner still is performing as per its specification? I've not myself seen detailed studies looking at the indoor pollution contributions from, and it would be poorly maintained wood burners, yes. But I have seen plenty of studies demonstrating that you can detect the wood burning signature within PM 2.5 measured in London by actually looking at the chemical signatures which specifically arise from the burning of wood.
So is the wood burner thing, is it more of an issue that it's contributing to the PM2 outside generally for all of us, or is that there is also a sub-issue as to if it's poorly maintained bit of kit inside your house, what it could be?
I'm always going to go for outside because pollution you throw outside affects everybody. Yeah, and so it's a bit like I remember when I did the studies in Tower Hamlets. They had terrible traffic-related pollution, but the lowest rates of car ownership at the time in London. There's that terrible sort of inequality in it. Yes, so your wood burning is affecting other people's health. It may be affecting your house if your wood burner is not well maintained and it's not properly vented, yes? But who does that? Whose responsibility is it to go into people's houses to check that?
We've reached the end of our time allocation on this, and I see Nina Griffiths is here for the next item as well. So I am going to draw this to a close with a big thank you for everyone, for Dr. Mudway, who's our external guest, for coming, and also to Dave and to Chris. Just trying to draw things sort of together. I mean, obviously this is something that we're learning about. I mean, it may be something just for new members. We often have things coming back on a sort of yearly basis to keep an eye on it. It may well be that obviously not ask Dr. Mudway to come back, but maybe for Chris and Dave to maybe come back in a year's time, just to give us any further update on sort of where they are with any sort of local progression or evidence base and how things are moving. I don't quite know if the WHO have just changed their guidance and we've got a strategy that goes on for another 3 or 4 years, whether we are seeking to take that into account at an earlier stage in our plan was something that sort of going on from what Dr. Mudway said at the start in terms of, well, we've got the goalposts have moved and we've got to move with them. And also from your perspective to us in terms of any future sort of policy initiatives or things that we could drive through or suggestions to both in communications and we can take forward as sort of policy leads as well. So I think as a pulling it together, it's maybe, if members agree, maybe certainly if Chris and Dave wouldn't mind to maybe come back in a year's time with sort of like, with a greater refresh as to where we are. And it may well be there's further studies. Well, we're 18 months off the Cllr study. But with a big thank you then to everyone, and with that I'll wrap that item up and draw it to a close. And for the guests that were here for that item, please don't feel the need to stay, and please feel free to go for our last item, which will be 20 minutes or so. Thank you. So I'm now going to move on to what is item number 7 on the agenda. Welcome Nina Griffith, who has just arrived. Congratulations on your appointment to Director of Delivery. I'm not going to read out the rest of the rest of it. Nina, before you, thank you, Dr. Mudway, thank you very much. Before you came, Nina, just to let you know, I mean, obviously we've got a lot of new counts here. It's a new term, and I was just trying to sort of in our pre-meet, I was trying to fill in a very brief snapshot way that previously commissioning was done on a sort of CCG borough level, and then that's moved up. But the idea was to retain the 3 systems across North East London, and commissioning to hopefully from what Henry and was saying, Henry Black, who's one of the leaders at a North East London level, was saying to us pre the election. Was that at that point there would still be a desire that things come back down to a place-based City and Hackney level for us able as a commission. And so the purpose of asking you here today, and we've got about sort of 15 or so minutes left, is to give us an update on where we were, because obviously it was an evolving picture and the new system was bedding in. So just to give us an update on where we are, and I think particular focus on that sort of what we were hoping was that some of that commissioning responsibility was going to come back down to a City and Hackney level, and in reality is that what is happening? And if you could just bear in mind that we've got a lot of new members, and so as to make it as translatable as possible, trying to avoid the acronyms where possible.
That one. Thank you. I was pressing the green button incorrectly. Thank you very much. So yeah, thank you for having me. My name's Nina Griffith, and I've recently been appointed to the role of Director of Delivery for the City and Hackney Place-Based Partnership. As I start to talk through my slides, that will hopefully mean a little bit more to you. So what I'm going to talk to you about today is essentially give you a little bit of an update around what's happening nationally around the NHS reforms as we move to the ICS structure, what's happening, what that means within North East London, which is the ICS that we are part of, and then what that means for us locally within Hackney. And part of that is, part of what I will talk through, which is quite important, is some of the language that we use to describe those different levels, just because that's kind of very much wrapped in, that's very much wrapped up in the NHS jargon around it, but it's quite important that you understand what we mean. So essentially, you may be aware that as of the 1st of July, there is a reform in the NHS will take place from the 1st of July. So that's on Friday. So on the 1st of July, we move from having what used to be clinical commissioning groups to ICSs. So what were clinical commissioning groups are being dissolved, and what is being replaced are integrated care systems. Across the country, there are 44 integrated care systems. Within London, there are 5 integrated care systems. We are part of North East London Integrated Care System. And within North East London, there are 7 boroughs plus the City of London. So that's what comprises North East London. And one of the fundamental principles of the reform is to try to break down the split between providers and commissioners. So to bring together providers and commissioners to jointly manage a budget, to have joint response of an area, to have joint responsibility for the health of that population.
Your providers, because I mean I struggle with this at the start, your providers would be your Homerton, your GPs, these are your providers of your health, your commissioners are your people who are obviously instructing you to do it.
Yeah.
Until now, that was under the CCG.
Yeah, until now, the commissioners are the CCG.
And that's been dissolved entirely?
On Friday, the CCG as an organisation is being dissolved. What it's being replaced with is an organisation that operates across North East London, which is called the Integrated Care Board. So the current employees of all CCGs are being transferred to the employment of the Integrated Care Board. There is still, and that said, within each integrated care system, there's clear guidance, policy guidance, and an expectation that you form, that within each integrated care system, we also form place-based partnerships. And when we talk about the place-based partnerships, that's when we talk about the borough. And for us, City and Hackney forms our place-based partnership, and we will form one of 7 place-based partnerships within North East London. So a cohort of what were the ICB staff and will become, what were the CCG staff and will become the ICB Integrated Care Board staff, will be working within City and Hackney, within the place-based partnership. One of the differences from what you might have heard from Henry a few months ago, Councillor Hayhurst, previously within North East London, we were imagining that we would organise ourselves into 3 geographies: a geography around City and Hackney, a geography around inner North East London boroughs, Tower Hamlets, Newham, Waltham Forest, and a geography around the outer North East London boroughs. Now we're moving to we're dismantling a lot of that TNW, Tower Hamlets, Newham, those the other 2 structures are being scaled back, so that really what the North East London structure will look like is one overarching North East London kind of structure with 7 place-based partnerships underneath it. And that's really trying to strengthen the benefit of bringing together health and social care and providers within that borough patch to really understand what are the needs of that borough and how do you respond to the needs of that borough. And
so Nina, just to pause you there, so that will affect what were the other 2 systems
exactly.
maybe a bit more,
yeah.
because they were more grouped up and will now have to separate out amongst their individual boroughs. Correct. Where we were a place-based system pretty much within our borough. So it doesn't, that part of it Correct. Probably doesn't affect us as much.
It doesn't affect us as much at all, but it's important that you know that, given what you might have heard a few months ago. And I suppose really important we understand when you hear people talking within the context of NHS services, when you hear people talking about the place, what they mean is that borough boundary. And for us, our place is City and Hackney. So that's the partners who work within City and Hackney, who deliver and plan for health and care services, have come together in the place-based partnership in City and Hackney. We've had a partnership structure in place in City and Hackney for a number of years, probably since about 2016. So for us, that partnership structure is still there, is still in place, and we will continue to utilise that place-based structure. The kind of core facet of our place-based structure in terms of governance is what we call the Integrated Care Partnership Board, which is a board that brings together the partners who deliver and commission health and care services within City and Hackney. So the Homerton are a key partner around the table, East London Foundation Trust are a key partner, the GP Confederation are a key partner, and the City and Hackney team within the North East London CCG are a key partner, as well as obviously the local authority, both in terms of adult services, children's services and public health. So that group has met for a number of years and will continue to meet. That group is co-chaired by a member in the City and a member in Hackney. and for us, Chris Kennedy. So Councillor Kennedy provides the chairing of that group for us as the lead member for health and social care. And that will continue. And I've included in your slides, it's a lot of detail, a picture of the kind of structure yeah, that's that one there. That's a picture of our governance structure in City and Hackney, that partnership structure, and the different groups where people come together. And also how that does report into the North East London CCG structure. The first of this complicated diagram is how it currently is right now. The second of the complicated diagram is how it will change after Friday when the new reform goes through. Yeah, with some no, the second one looks the same but has some circles on it. It's not very, yeah. And one of the key things I guess I wanted to say to you is it's not that different. So because we've already got an existing partnership structure in City and Hackney, us moving to formally become a place-based partnership within the new ICS isn't a huge shift for us. But I did want to pick up some of the changes. So the first change is, as I said, one of the key objectives of the broader national policy was to bring together commissioners and providers of health and social of health services, certainly, to try and break down some of that provider commissioner split. So one of the changes for us is that on that partnership board, currently, as in right now, pre the reform, that partnership board, when it had to make commissioning decisions, it had a subgroup that was a subset that didn't include the providers that would meet to make commissioning decisions. In the new world, it will continue when it needs to make commissioning decisions, the providers will still be in the room for those commissioning decisions. So it more formally brings together providers and commissioners and really tries to put the onus on all of us to deliver the best services for our populations, not just be looking out for our own organisational priorities. The second change in our structure is, and I think this is more around, one of the things that we've done is, whilst there's not a huge amount of structural change for us locally in City and Hackney in relation to the new reforms, we have used it as a sort of important juncture to say, how can we make the most from our partnership structure? How can we really make sure that our partnership structure is working well? And how can we really make sure that our partnership structure has that local mandate from our local people to do, to drive improvements in health and care services? So we've gone through an exercise locally through that integrated care partnership board to say, what's our overarching, to do a bit of a strategy refresh, to refresh what our strategic priorities are. And one of the things that we have done is we have formally that's happened at a really good time, because it's happened essentially at the same time as the Health and Wellbeing Board in Hackney refreshed their strategy. So we've been able to say very clearly, we will adopt the 3 strategic priority areas that came out of the Hackney Health and Wellbeing Board, and through the Integrated Care Partnership Board, we will try and drive that strategy in terms of our work with health and care partners. So the 3
priorities are?
Mental health, just a minute, they're in your pack on another boxy page. They are mental health, supporting greater financial well-being, and increasing social connection. So we think, as health and care partners in City and Hackney, we have a responsibility to support those broader aims of the Health and Wellbeing Board, and we have formally adopted those within our kind of strategic priorities as health and care partners. So that's one of the and as a result of that, we've also done some reorganisation of our programmes that we have in place to deliver our objectives, to better align them to our strategic priorities. So we've done some work essentially to say, let's review our strategic priorities, let's make sure that our programme structure can deliver on those priorities, and to develop a plan, and we're in the process of developing what we're calling an integrated delivery plan to really describe how we are delivering on those strategies. And hopefully at a future meeting we can bring more detailed updates on that kind of work plan, because that's where it gets really interesting. One of the other changes that is important, but not is important for you to know, but it's a bit more superficial, is because of the change in the legislation, as part of the national legislation, we've had to change the name of our local group. So what was called the Integrated Care Partnership Board is having to change its name because, and this gets a bit technical, within the national guidance, they use the words Integrated Care Programme Board to mean a system level or an ICS level committee that is mandated in the national legislation. So it means we've had to change the name of our local board. So we're going to start calling ourselves, the City and Hackney Health and Care Board. So from September, that board that I described that Councillor Kennedy chairs, will become the City and Hackney Health and Care Board. And hopefully that does what it says on the tin and means something to people who hear about it. But that's...
In City and Hackney,
yeah,
that's your top level of governance and decision making. But what would sit below that is a more sort of nuts and bolts delivery board that suggests practical things. We think this is the best commission thing here. It goes up to that board that Chris chairs for a governance thing. Do you agree? They have to give the final sign off to make sure they agree. But a lot of the donkey work is done at the board below. Is that
correct? Yeah, that's exactly right. That's exactly right.
How's this going to affect this change in terms of the funding? That stay the same? Obviously, control.
In terms of funding, yeah. So what we know, so there's different. I guess we know that City and Hackney at the moment receives an allocation for a health allocation. We will continue. There will continue to be an allocation in City and Hackney, and we've been given a commitment that allocation will not be reduced to support other areas of the system. But we do know that there may be, as there is currently within the current sort of CCG setup, there are differing levels of growth that are applied to different allocations. There'll be more of within the new setup, North East London will be able to take more views on differing levels of growth that go to the 7 different areas within City and Hackney. So North East London will have more of a view of where there may be differential levels of growth. That's the first thing. I guess the second thing to say is that there will be delegation from the ICS level to the place committee, but not in the first year. So in the first year, we won't get formal delegation. So the money will still flow, but there won't be a formal decision-making delegation to that committee in the first year, but there will be in subsequent years. That said, we have gone through a process to ensure that there are quite good levels of non-recurrent monies that we do have complete local control over in this coming year. So, for example, we have significant amounts. We have just been given, we will be given a portion of health inequalities funding that came to the ICS and has been distributed across the different places. We've got some other pots of non-recurrent monies that we absolutely will have complete control over.
That first year, Nina, the rationale was what? Because the systems aren't in place to give the scheme of delegation to allow for it to all happen properly, because it needs to go through lawyers, I guess, and all sorts, or not.
Yeah, exactly that. NHS England have said they don't expect there to be so there's absolutely a commitment to delegation, but from year one, that formal delegation won't be in place. That will start from next year, just to get things in place. However, there are, as I said, we do have pots of non-recurrent money that we can absolutely control. We also, round our partnership board, the providers who sit round that partnership board sit there with their budgets. You know, they have service allocations, which they know for the coming year, and they come to that partnership board with those service budgets. So we can determine between us that we want to move money around between us if we want to, and we have local control to do that if we want to.
Grace?
Just want to know what proportion of the budget is coming down to City and Hackney
in the coming year.
Maybe not, but let's maybe go for the year after, because this is an exceptional year. So when we go back, because we had been talking about an 80-20 split of sort of what I mean, but that was always a bit.
You're talking, I guess we're kind of talking about different things. So there's the allocation, which is the amount of money that gets determined to be for City and Hackney population out of the total ICS budget. That's the allocation. And then the second question is the delegation, which is the amount of that money, which is the actual amount of money that this, what will be called the Health and Care Board, the City and Hackney Health and Care Board can control, spend over. So they're two slightly different things. We don't yet know what that will look like exactly from next year, from the year after next. So I can't answer that yet.
That's something we need to keep
It
you
is,
know,
yeah.
and then certainly at a northeast London level, that's certainly something that everyone knows I'm very keen on keeping an eye on, because as we were discussing in our pre-meet, for us to control as much of we had control of before is important to us, and we think that we've got a good system that's working well comparatively. And just to pick up on Councillor Goldberg's, and Nina alluded to this. I mean, the healthcare system is not in Hackney, hasn't been well funded, but comparatively to others, because it's been deprivation linked, has been comparatively, I'm being quite generalistic here, I think most people say comparatively well funded compared to other areas. There could be a risk going forward that if you have areas in northeast London that have an older base population, should more weighting of funding be given to people with older populations, or should it be given to maybe more inner London areas where there's greater deprivation? So where should you weight your health funding? And that is of course an issue for us, because on previous sort of sharings of the pot, it's been quite heavily deprivation linked, or so we haven't done too badly. But obviously there's a lot of political pressure if we've got a very elderly population, that's cost. So there's that tension that is a constant thing, and I'm not quite sure that I guess it's still being grappled with as to what is a fair distribution there.
Yeah. I guess the other thing that I want to just, I suppose, talk to is some of the key people that I suppose work in our place-based partnership. So in terms of formalising the place-based partnership, we have agreed as a group of health and care partners that we will have a place leader, which is a senior person working in the system already, who will act as the overarching convener and leader for the partnership. We had agreed previously that it would be the chief executive of the Homerton Hospital, who was Tracy Fletcher. She left the Homerton, she's moved to a trust in Kent in March. Her successor has been appointed, and it's a lady called Louise Ashley. Louise she's already a chief exec working in Kent, coincidentally. So she comes to the Homerton. She's starting at the end of October. She's previously worked in the Homerton. She was a nurse in the Homerton many years ago. And she will come in and she will take on that role as place leader. So in addition to being the chief executive of the Homerton, she will also take on a wider role for our place-based partnership. And she'll be a really important influencer for, supporting our place-based partnership locally and within North East London. Another kind of change that has happened was there was an agreement between the place partners to make some key appointments to roles that would actively support the role of the place-based partnership. And there have been two appointments, one of which is my role. So I was appointed as, the job title is called Director of Delivery for the place-based partnership, which essentially means I oversee development and delivery of our work plan. And I report both into Louise as the place-based leader and into Helen Woodland as so I have a local authority link as well. So I'm
Helen Woodland being our Director of Adult Social Care.
Yes, thank you for coming in. So I report both into the health side and the local government side to hopefully bring that partnership together. We've also appointed a system clinical lead or partnership clinical lead, who is a lady named Dr. Stephanie Coughlin. And hopefully you'll be meeting her at your future meetings as well.
And she's a long-standing GP at Lower Clapton.
Yeah, she is, absolutely.
And just we've got to wrap this up now because we thank you, Nina. That's been very helpful to sort of like I'm trying to just try and bring people up to speed. So that's been very helpful. And Tracy Fletcher had previously mentioned she'd possibly envisaged 3 people sort of under her as place-based leader. Is there going to be a third appointment or not, or just those 2?
Honestly, I think that's up to Louise to decide. So I think when Louise gets here, she needs to determine what she thinks is the best structure.
And so when Louise starts in October, I mean, she will be a regular sort of attender, we hope, to these sort of meetings for us to, you know, hold her to account about what the latest changes are, what's going on. If there's a particular issue that's politically contentious, we want to ask her about and challenge her on. She'll be here as well as sort of Nina on the delivery side and Stephanie on the medical side. So these will be our key people to hold to account. Now we've done it here. Nina has sort of done a sort of presentation to us in terms of let us know what's going on, but in other aspects, if there's a change in service, we might be asking far more tougher questions of Nina, say, than we've done today, which has been more about explaining it to you. So that, you know what I mean, our role as, you know, councillors here will also be to hold Nina and Louise and Stephanie to account and ask, you know, difficult questions. But you know, constructively, but challenge and hold to account is our role.
If it's helpful to have, if it would be helpful to have a kind of briefing on any of this outside of the scrutiny environment, let us know. Let me know. We can organise that.
That'd be really helpful. The minutes from the previous meeting, agenda item 9, can we all agree them? Some of you weren't here, but I just need formal agreement. Thank you. Agenda item 10, our work programme. I've already, now what that is what the things we want to look at this year, things we want to have agenda items on. I've had feedback from several people. Councillor Patrick's got some ideas. Several ideas are coming in. Members, if you've got particular topics you think it would be good for us to look at, this might come from your casework, your knowledge, your experience, send them to JHOSC, and then we can have a discussion and work through. We've got to work with practicalities. Can we get someone to speak to that and things like that, or is that plausible? We will try and bring them in and include them within the work programme. So send your ideas to JHOSC, please. The only other thing to mention is that what was going to be our meeting on the 26th of July, some of the agenda items sort of have fallen through for various reasons. And what we're thinking at the moment is we don't want to sort of have a meeting and just fill it with not very good stuff, but to move our July meeting to a date in January in the calendar that we'll check everyone's diaries can do, but then not. So I'm thinking at the moment, well, I'll confirm it to you, but that we actually move our July meeting to January, because we didn't have a meeting in January. We'll make sure everyone's diary hasn't got another council meeting in it. 8. 8. And the other aspect is the meeting, the North East London meeting we've actually got is also the next night in July than we were meant to have a Health in Hackney. So it's all getting a bit too much in terms of capacity to pull it together and organise. So I'll confirm it, but the view is at the moment I'd rather have a more productive meeting in January where we've got good things on the agenda than just trying to put fillers in for July that don't really, you know. No, there will be. We'll be back in September. We're back in September. It was only that in January, because there are only 8 a year, that was a month where we didn't previously have one. So no. It's just that yeah. So that's the current thinking, but I will confirm it. And also there's a members meeting on the possible changes to fertility. Chris Kennedy is organising a members meeting on that. It will also come to the North East London level meeting in July that I'm chairing as well. So it's getting a layer of scrutiny there. And for members here who want to learn about those changes to the facility thing, go to Chris Kennedy's meeting that he's organising for members. Okay, with that, I'll call it to a close. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you.